Hey everybody, Brian here from quantlabs.net. Okay, so I did another analysis in a video here, if I can pull up my YouTube channel. This video here I've called Concrete Proof How the U.S. Federal Reserve Manipulates the Bad Debt Situation. You may want to watch that, which kind of ties in with the charts that I'm about to show you. So here, what I've got here is I've got four new charts. The first one I'm going to show you is the balance sheet of the U.S. government. Now, the Fed was only starting to track this since around, I believe, 2003. Fairly low, and this is again measured. Everything now with the Fed is always measured against the GDP. So if you got low GDP, it's going to look better. Actually, no, I take that back. But it's measured against the GDP, and you can see how low it is here. But it's just been piling up pretty good. It's about the peak of 2015, and this is an actual forecast up until 2021. So there is a forecast of reducing the overall balance sheet of the federal government against GDP. I guess obviously that's a good thing. The next thing we need to worry about is the debt to GDP. As I said before, everything now seems to be, as of last year, is being measured on the debt to GDP with the GDP ratio. So obviously as the US debt goes up 20 trillion, they're trying to make it look like it's not a big deal. And I'm going to explain something in a little bit. But you can see here that the debt GDP jumped pretty high, and they try to bring it back in line. So I'm not sure on the time periods, but this is probably during the war in Iraq, maybe. Around here, it was a bit of a recession here. You can see it's not as frequent, but since 2000, there's a lot more blips of the debt pile on against GDP, and now in the last 8 years the GDP has gotten much lower, so as they pile on the debt per year, it jumps up. So they're trying to keep it all in line, but you can see where it's pretty stable up until late 90s, and then all of a sudden since 06, 07, there's a lot more activity there as they pile on debt, trying to cut debt here and here. But at the end of the day, it still nets out where they're just piling on more debt against the GDP. So not cool. So I'll talk about it how, again, the U.S. Fed tries to hide all the niceties of the debt, the $19 trillion debt. The next chart we look at is a surplus and GDP against as a percent. Now, I can't say if this is accurate or not, and the reason I say that is because the key word here is total, because they've changed. And again, if you watch this video I just highlighted here, Concrete Proof on the U.S., if you watch that video, this is one of the things that you will get. And again, I'm not sure if this is the accurate way of doing it, where I'm taking the total service of debt or deficit per year and measuring against as a percentage against the GDP. So you can see it's very little positive, meaning that the GDP is stronger than the deficit each year. That's the whole idea of what they're trying to do here, is they're trying to rejuvenate the U.S. economy so that GDP is much higher than the deficit each year of the U.S. deficit. You can see it clearly not working. Actually, if it's not working, it's actually making it a lot worse. So I think this chart sort of showcases that what they're trying to do for the last, we'll say, eight years just is not working. This is the first time here in 07, 08 where things dropped, and let's add on debt and spend, quantitative easing in the hope that we spark the economy, and the GDP will be so good and so high that it will hide these kind of ratios as the U.S. deficit each year grows and grows and grows and gets worse and worse each year. This is not total. Well, it is total of the total deficit, but again, when I say deficit, it's not debt. It's deficit performance of each year on the total receipts through tax and how much they're spending. So they're clearly spending a lot more money than they're bringing in, but they're trying to hide that. Now, the funny thing is, in this next chart, and again, if you watch that previous video that I have here, it's really important to understand this, because up until last year in 2015, since around, let's say, the 30s, you were able to measure the interest on debt, on the U.S. debt. Well, they've somehow removed that, oddly, and because the interest has now been removed, we can no longer really properly assess the liquidity of the U.S. government. So now they're trying to put out some smoke and mirrors and trying to hide the fact that the U.S. debt interest on the U.S. debt is killing the overall performance of how the U.S. government is able to spend money, and at the same time they have to service that debt. But nobody's talking about the level of interest of per year on the, let's say, $19-20 trillion of debt that's massing each and every year, and that debt has to get serviced through interest, which then got to get paid back out to the bondholders, to obviously a lot of foreign banks and other institutions within the U.S. government. So here is what we're talking about. The only thing we could get are liquidity swaps. That's just a new measurement coming from the government, the Federal Reserve, that is. So basically what we're talking here is another measurement of quantitative easing. So this is the program they put in 2008, and look how much money they're spending over this time period. And again, they had to do it. And again, I'm just waiting for that crisis to hit, and this quantitative easing may not really work. Well, obviously, clearly this phase didn't work. This program didn't work. Quantitative easing did not work, as has been shown in this chart. I mean, no offense, but if these are experts, it's somewhat laughable. I mean, could you imagine you trying to get a loan from the bank or a credit card company like Visa? I say, I want to spend, but they're going to ask you how much money you make, but you're going to just continually spend and rack up the debt, and you're going to have an interest. At some point, the piper wants to get is going to ask and call for its debt that's totally owed, and it's kind of ridiculous now that this is scary, and I think the Fed is trying to hide the fact that they are in trouble. They're just trying to change the message here. But when you look at these charts, and the data is raw data right from the Fed, that's St. Louis Fed, or let's say St. Louis Fed, is raw data, and this right here is quantitative easing, which correlates back to the previous chart time period, right, based around quantitative easing. And the performance is pretty well killed off total service deficit against the GDP, which has been, in previous videos I've shown, has been consistently low, like around 2%. They're just not meeting their 2% target. And when I look at it, I think it's time to put money into gold. A lot of money into gold, actually, because that's the only thing that's going to retain its value as we move forward in 2016, September 8th. Okay? Just putting that out there. I find that's quite laughable on what the Fed's trying to do. But they're just trying to fool us, thinking we're going to change the data sets as explained in this video, and think that people won't see that. But I'm sure I'm not the only one that's noticed this, but I thought I'd put it out there. All right, hopefully this will help you out, and talk to you later.